Welcome back to Topics in Psychology. I'm Dr. Sharon Eves, psychotherapist, author, and educator, and today I want to talk about object constancy. Of all the things I've talked about over the last 40 plus years with clients and students, this concept is probably one of the top 10 concepts that creates an aha moment, a light bulb moment for someone. They think, now I understand why I felt the way I did. Now I understand why I emotionally react the way I do. A lot of what I do in therapy is help people connect the dots from what's happened to them in their lives to what's going on with them emotionally now. It's really valuable. Another way to look at that is therapy is a process of integration of all these experiences of understanding what one feels. Things start to make a lot more sense. If you grew up in a family where things didn't make sense, when things make more sense, it's empowering. So let's talk about object permanence, and then we'll talk about object constancy. With object permanence, a concept you may be familiar with a little tiny baby, when you put a toy in front of the baby and you take the toy away, the baby doesn't remember that the toy exists. So it doesn't get upset, it doesn't look for the toy, because its brain hasn't developed the capacity to hold a representation of that item once it's out of sight. As the baby gets older, it develops object permanence, where if you put a toy in front of the baby and you take the toy away, the baby looks for the toy, the baby may get upset, may cry, because at that point, the baby remembers that the item existed, is able to have that representation in its mind. So there's an emotional corollary to this, object constancy, whereas object permanence had to do with a physical feeling, a physical remembering of something. Object constancy has to do with maintaining an emotional tone, being able to emotionally maintain an experience even though someone's not in the room or the event isn't going on. So let's say you've had a lovely morning with your partner, loving, a lot of connection, you feel loved, you feel good, and then your partner leaves to go to work. And as the day goes on, there's a creeping insecurity that builds and builds and builds. Just earlier that day, you felt reassured that there was love there. How do you forget that? I think it has to do with just like the little baby who hasn't developed the ability to maintain a representation in their little brains of what it was that the toy they saw. When a person hasn't developed object constancy, their brains haven't developed to maintain that emotional tone, remembering, oh yeah, there's love there, even though it's not going on actively in the present moment in front of you. How does that happen? How do we grow up developing object constancy? And for many of us who came from dysfunctional families, we may not have developed object constancy. So when you're little and the adults in the room don't respond to what you're feeling, they may interact with you for a moment and then they're ignoring you, or they don't even acknowledge what you're feeling. They don't acknowledge when you're scared and need comforting, or if you're sad and need comforting. So what happens is a child then may not develop that emotional trust, that sense that whatever was going on emotionally is real, it's consistent, and it will continue. If a baby is grown up if a child is grown up with that kind of attention, seeing who the baby is, what we call accurate mirroring, where the parents reflect back accurately the child's value, reflects back their feelings. When they do that, a child develops the ability to trust that who's ever loving you is going to love you later. If they disappear on you, You may not develop object constancy if they're there and consistent with you. It's easier to develop that. So what does that mean for you now as an adult? If you've developed object constancy, great. There's love. Someone loves you. When they're not with you, you still remember they love you. If you haven't developed object constancy, you're not able to maintain that feeling tone. And remember, even though they're out of sight, they're still in my mind, they're still in my heart. How do we deal with this as adults if we haven't developed object constancy? Let's look at some of the literature for just a moment on John Bowlby's work and Mary Ainsworth on having a secure base. What helps you develop that emotional feeling tone, that sense of security? Growing up with consistent, loving parenting. I talk about this a lot more in my attachment videos, so I'm not going to go into all of it right now. If you grow up with that consistent loving parenting, you're probably going to develop that ability to maintain that emotional tone, even when someone's not with you. So if you don't do that, if that's not what has come from your upbringing, it's a good thing to be aware of. In this moment, I'm not feeling loved. I was feeling loved an hour ago, but when my partner's gone, I don't feel it. So let me try to understand what that's about, what that means for me, what that meant for me when I was little, and then growing up. I didn't develop that trust that an emotional experience would happen again and again. It would be there and then disappear. So to be aware now that you're reacting to something from way back when, that's good to help you understand what's going on with you now. And you can check in and look at your beliefs about it. Do you believe that someone loved you this morning and then they've forgotten about you? Or did someone love you, and is there a greater likelihood that they still love you some hours later? There are times when we don't trust someone else, and there's a really good reason for that. They're not trustworthy. But there are times when people are trustworthy, and we have a hard time letting that in. It has to do with object constancy. It has to do with whether we grew up with a secure base or not. Check out the attachment video. I have more suggestions how to care for yourself around this. But just understanding where this came from, hopefully that's useful to you. Thanks for being with us today. We have lots of videos. We keep putting more up that hopefully are helpful to you. We'll see you soon.